Published 13/21 Est, 6 November 2017. Updated 14/14 Est, 6 November 2017. Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton avoided paying VAT on his £16.5 million private jet, the Paradise Papers have revealed. The 32-year-old, who won his fourth title last week, received a £3.7 million refund for the Bombardier Challenger 605, which was imported into the Isle of Man. Any private jet purchased outside the European Union is subject to 20% VAT. In order to move freely around the continent, Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton avoided paying VAT on his £16.5 million private jet pictured, the Paradise Papers have revealed. The 32-year-old, who won his fourth title last week, received a £3.3 million refund for the Bombardier Challenger 605, which was imported into the Isle of Man under UK and EU legislation. He would have been entitled to a VAT rebate on the jet if it was to be used purely for business purposes. However, documents suggest that around a third of Hamilton's journeys were for private trips. The Isle of Man's government took steps to implement tax avoidance schemes that have enabled the world superrich to get tax breaks on jets. Customs officials work closely with Appleby and Big Four accounting firm EY to allow individuals to pay almost zero VAT on imports. Jet owners are able to claim VAT refunds if they say that their business is leasing them out. However, this loophole is easily exploited by owners leasing the planes to themselves to avoid paying tax. The tiny island, which has a population of only 83,000, has the second largest jet register in Europe and is expected to notch up its 1,000th aircraft this year. Leaked Appleby files suggest the loophole has been exploited by Osama bin Laden's half-brother Baqir, as well as several people who are closely tied to Vladimir Putin and are currently subject to sanctions. Hamilton's lawyers said there had been no illegal activity, but admitted no VAT had been paid on the plane. The Mercedes star's social media account shows him using the plane to jet off to holidays across the globe, while he has also posed on board with his two bulldogs, Roscoe and Coco. The accountancy firm EY and Appleby, the law firm at the center of the Paradise Papers leaks, helped Hamilton and others set up seemingly artificial leasing businesses through which they rented their own jets from themselves. Files leaked from Appleby suggest as much as £1.1 million of the VAT he appears to have reclaimed on his jet should have been paid, along with hundreds of thousands due on the continuing costs of flying the jet. The aircraft is now registered to a Hamilton company in the Virgin Islands, which in turn leases it to another in the Isle of Man, which in turn rents it to a screen company in Guernsey. They said his practice was to rely on professional advice, and he was not concerned with day-to-day management of his business, according to investigators working for the France 2 TV channel. Hamilton set up another Isle of Man company to buy a £1.5 million motorhome that he used at racetracks. No VAT appears to have been paid on that purchase either. Legitimate tax avoidance schemes are legal, and there is no suggestion Hamilton was directly involved in creating the scheme used for his jet. The Mercedes star's social media account shows him using the plane to jet off to holidays across the globe. Hamilton left the United Kingdom to live in Monaco and then Switzerland in 2007, so as to avoid paying excessive UK tax. This year's Sunday Times rich list put his personal wealth at £131 million. He said when it was published, I race in 19 different countries, so I earn my money in 20 different places and I pay tax in several different places, and I pay a lot here as well. I am contributing to the country and, not only that, I help keep a team of more than 1,000 people employed. I am part of a much bigger picture. Rita de la Ferrier, professor of tax law at Leeds University, told the BBC if private usage of the jet is being disguised as business usage of the jet, then what you essentially have is a tax avoidance scheme. You're using it for your own private interests, you're going on holidays, meeting friends. You're supposed to pay the tax on private consumption. The 32-year-old, who won his fourth title last week, pictured during the celebrations, received a £3.3 million refund for the Bombard Challenger 605, which was imported into the Isle of Man. The Paradise Papers dossier says cash was secretly funneled to the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and revealed Bono, members of Donald Trump's cabinet and businesses including Apple and Facebook also invested in tax havens. The Queen, Irish U2 star Bono, members of Donald Trump's cabinet and some of the world's biggest firms including Facebook are also named among the 13.4 million confidential documents. Dubbed the Paradise Papers, the leak is second only to last year's Panama Papers and again exposes how the rich and powerful shield wealth offshore. Hundreds of individuals and companies reportedly have had their overseas investments exposed by the files, which are also said to reveal that major global companies have exploited offshore schemes to avoid tax. First obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, the documents stem from 2 offshore service providers and company registries from 19 tax havens, The Guardian reports. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists oversaw the project. What are the Paradise Papers? More than 13 million leaked secret corporate files, about half of which belong to offshore law and corporate services provider Appleby, which has 10 offices around the globe. There are also documents from corporate registries in 19 tax havens. These are mostly Caribbean and Atlantic islands such as Bermuda, Grenada and the Bahamas, but also include Malta, Lebanon, Labuin and Island Territory in Malaysia, Samoa, Vanuatu, the Cook Islands and the Marshall Islands. They cover the period between 1950 and 2016. Is this the same as the Panama Papers? The Panama Papers involved millions of files leaked from Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, showing how some of their clients laundered money, dodged sanctions and avoided tax. This is a separate leak, although will raise many of the same questions. Who got the documents, and how? The German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung obtained the files and shared them with 95 other media organizations around the world. In all, 381 journalists in 67 countries have been analyzing the material for 1 year. Süddeutsche Zeitung has not revealed its source. What do the leaks contain? Documents outlining the tax and financial affairs of hundreds of people and companies connected to Appleby and the 19 tax havens, with many appearing to have invested or sheltered huge amounts of cash in offshore tax havens. Who do they involve? Multinational companies, wealthy individuals, heads of state, politicians and sports stars from around the world, including many from the UK. Some of the biggest names to emerge so far include the Queen, Facebook and Donald Trump's cabinet members and advisors. Why is it controversial to put money offshore? Offshore tax havens typically offer low or zero tax rates to non-residents who keep money there. Experts estimate that around $10 trillion, £7.6 trillion is held offshore around the world. That money would potentially otherwise be taxed in the owner's home country, meaning governments are potentially missing out on billions in revenue. Critics also say the secrecy makes it easy for companies to hide wrongdoing. Will this cause a row about tax avoidance? Further evidence of the extent of cash being held in tax havens is certain to spur anger and calls for a crackdown on tax avoidance practices. However, recent leaks including the Panama Papers may have created a certain level of leak fatigue, denting the document's impact. Royal experts today said the Queen is being shamed to take the heat off true tax hypocrites after the Paradise Papers revealed £10 million of her cash was ploughed into an offshore fund. Royal officials have said she had no direct involvement in the investments and they are not aware of any tax advantages. Today Jeremy Corbyn suggested that anyone on the list including the Queen should apologise. Dickie Arbiter, the Queen's former press secretary, told Mail Online the Queen's done nothing wrong and SHES got nothing to apologise for. The files include allegations that the Queen's private estate secretly invested huge sums of cash in tax havens to Queen is being knocked to take the heat of others. He added the money has been invested by the Duchy of Lancaster, not her, and the money doesn't go in her pocket and would be used for the upkeep of palaces and pensions for retired staff. Mr. Arbiter said her tax affairs being front page would be uncomfortable for the Queen because anyone with an ounce of financial nous knows profits coming into the UK from offshore is taxed at the W. Fellow royal expert Phil Dampier said that it was completely wrong that there was focus on the Queen, who probably knew nothing, while letting hypocrites like Bono off the hook. Labour MP Dame Margaret Hodge, the former chairwoman of the Commons Public Accounts Committee, said she believed the Queen would be horrified to learn how her funds had been invested. Her offshore investments emerged in a huge data leak of 13.4 million confidential documents reveals the cash was secretly funneled to the Caymans and Bermuda. Dame Margaret said, "I think the Queen herself would be completely shocked to find her advisors have used tax havens in which to invest their money, and that her reputation has been sullied by the actions of the tax advisors." Theresa May has said individuals and businesses should pay the tax that is due, as the financial affairs of the global elite were laid bare today. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell said he was shocked but not surprised by the industrial levels of cash being invested offshore, and said the public would be outraged by the leak, calling for a public inquiry. He said the super-rich are avoiding paying their taxes like the rest of us and, as a result of that, not funding our public services. The cache of documents reveals Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has significant business ties to President Vladimir Putin's son-in-law, while Russia funded Facebook and Twitter investments through an associate of Jared Kushner, the U.S. president's son-in-law and advisor. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is named as a director of an offshore firm behind a billion-dollar oil and gas enterprise in the Middle East. Today, Jeremy Corbyn suggested that anyone on the list, including the Queen, should apologize if financial documents, which will be released throughout this week, show that Queen's money was invested in Bright House, a hire purchase retail company accused of exploiting poorer households. Cash also helped prop up Threshers, the now-defunct off-license chain. Bono used a firm in tax haven Malta to buy a shopping centre in Lithuania. Madonna named as having shares in a medical supplies company, and Keira Knightley said to have invested in a Jersey-based property company. Kremlin-controlled firms invested in Facebook and Twitter via a business contact of President Trump's son-in-law. Mr. Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has a stake in a firm with ties to Vladimir Putin's son-in-law. Russian billionaires used offshore network to buy shares in Everton and Arsenal. Theresa May resists calls for public inquiry into offshore tax, but says we want people to pay the tax that is due. The Queen's income comes from the Duchy of Lancaster, a private estate which was set up in 1399 to generate a financial return for the reigning monarch. It manages land and investments held in trust for the monarch, and the assets are worth £519 million according to its latest accounts. According to the leak, the duchy has used offshore private equity funds designed to shield UK investors from having to pay US tax on their holdings. Leaked to a global consortium of media organisations including the BBC and The Guardian, the Paradise Papers show that £10.7 million of the Queen's private money was invested in funds in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. A sum of £5.7 million was invested through a Cayman Islands fund named Dover Street Vi Cayman Fund LP. The Dover Street Fund invested about £3,000 of the Queen's money in Bright House, which has 270 stores. The 13.4 million confidential documents reveal some of the world's richest, most famous and most influential people allegedly invested in a Cayman offshore fund. The leak names royalty and heads of state past and present: Queen Elizabeth II, President of Colombia Juan Manuel Santos, ex-German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, former Prime Minister of Pakistan Shaukat Aziz, former Prime Ministers of Canada John Chrystion, Paul Martin and Brian Mulroney, officials Wesley Clark, former presidential candidate Gary Cohn, Director of the National Economic Council, Cabinet officials Blair O'Mahony and Wilbur Ross, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State stars Madonna and Bono, big business Allianz, Bayer, Siemens, Glencore, Apple, Facebook, McDonald's, Nike, Uber, Walmart and Yahoo. It has been accused of exploiting the poor by offering them hire purchase deals to buy goods such as washing machines, but effectively charging them double the shop price when loan interest is included. The firm has been under investigation by the Financial Conduct Authority, which last month said it was not a responsible lender. The Dover Street Fund also invested in Threshers, the chain of wine shops which went bust in 2009, owing £17.5 million in tax and costing almost 6,000 workers their jobs. Another £5 million was invested by the Duchy of Lancaster in the Jubilee Absolute Return Fund, which invests in hedge funds. At the time of the investment in June 2004, the fund was based in Bermuda. The Duchy sold its stake in 2010. There is nothing illegal in the investments and no suggestion that the Queen is not paying tax, or had any knowledge of the specific investments. The Paradise Papers also prompted questions for Tory donor Lord Ashcroft. The BBC said the papers showed he had retained his non-dom status while in the House of Lords, despite reports he had become a permanent tax resident in the UK. The Guardian said the peer, 71, had a previously unknown trust sheltering his vast overseas wealth. Lord Ashcroft's spokesman Alan Kilkenny said the peer had never engaged in tax evasion, abusive tax avoidance or tax avoidance using artificial structures, and any suggestion or implication that he has will be vigorously challenged. The Panama Papers revealed last year how Vladimir Putin's inner circle and other world leaders used tax havens. The explosive details have come from the company registries of 19 tax havens and has been obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung and investigated by 100 media organizations across the world. 3 stars of the Mrs. Brown's Boys sitcom allegedly piled £2 million into an offshore fund in Mauritius, the Paradise Papers also revealed. Paddy Houlihan, who plays Agnes Brown's son Dermot on the BBC hit, says he had to Google tax avoidance after a Panorama reporter called him in October over his investment. Mr. Houlihan claims joined the Mauritius scheme after advice from British accountant Roy Lynes, who also advised Jimmy Carr but said he never knew what the F was going on with his money. Fiona O'Carroll, who plays Maria Brown far left, Paddy Houlihan, who plays Dermot second left, and Martin Delaney, who plays Trevor fifth from left with glasses, are named in the Paradise Papers. Mrs. Brown's Boys star Brendan O'Carroll is not involved. Mr. Lynes also does the accounts for the Mrs. Brown's Boys global operation, but Brendan O'Carroll, who plays Mrs. Brown, did not use the Mauritius scheme. However, Mr. O'Carroll's daughter, Fiona O'Carroll, who plays Maria, and her husband, Martin Delaney, who plays Trevor, have been named as members of the scheme. Co-stars Amanda Woods, who plays Betty, and her husband Danny O'Carroll, reportedly signed up but did not invest, according to the Irish Times. Mr. Houlihan said he googled tax avoidance when a BBC reporter contacted him last month. Mr. Houlihan told the newspaper, "I was told the money went to a trust and it wasn't mine until I received it, and I didn't have to pay any tax until I got the money. I was in control of when I would pay tax. The first thing I thought of was the Jimmy Carr thing, but I was told it was illegal." He added it wasn't about dodging the tax. "I wanted to pay the tax, and said that now all he wants is to pay my taxes and live freely the way it was up until I got the phone call from Panorama." In 2012, Jimmy Carr made a groveling apology about his tax affairs and said he had made a terrible error of judgment. He had been one of thousands using illegal offshore scheme to pay as little as 1% income tax. He is believed to have been the largest beneficiary of the K2 accountancy arrangement, said to shelter £168 million a year from the taxman. Mr. Lynes was said to have marketed the scheme. He refused to respond to Mr. Houlihan's claims, according to The Guardian, but said all income from any source had been taxed as appropriate. Fiona O'Carroll, who plays Maria, and her husband, Martin Delaney, who plays Trevor, have been named as members of the scheme. Questions have been raised over who controls Everton FC after the complex offshore dealings of 2 billionaires were laid bare in the documents. Last year, Iranian businessman Fahad Moshiri sold his 15% stake in Arsenal FC to Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov and used the money to buy a 50% stake in the Merseyside club. But secret documents leaked to the press suggest his original stake in Arsenal was funded by a gift from Mr. Usmanov, raising questions as to whether the Russians' money is now in Everton. It was also revealed that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's top fundraiser and senior advisor Stephen Bronfman, heir to the Seagram fortune, moved $60 million to offshore tax havens with ex-Senator Leo Kolber. There is no suggestion that those named in the documents have done anything illegal. However, it will pile pressure on leading politicians including British Prime Minister Theresa May, who has strongly spoken out against tax avoidance in the past. Today's revelations are only the beginning of the scandal, with more figures set to be named during the coming week as more documents are released.